Class. Everybody remember that joke? Class, class. Shh. Thank you. Thank you. So my privilege today to introduce Mark Risis, who is from PepsiCo, and he's going to talk about the cultural and transformational access and things that you've had to do in order to get people to pay attention to this, because after all, you're a manufacturing company, right? Why would you need data? Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Go ahead.
Artificial intelligence is taking humans to places we couldn't go before. That's what makes this the age of with. The next question is, where can humans take AI? From the boardroom to the college lab, the Deloitte AI Institute is bringing forth insights and using our deep knowledge of all aspects of AI to make sense of this complex ecosystem. We are not just preparing to meet the AI future, we are shaping it together.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, thanks.
All right. Good morning, everybody. As Peter mentioned, I'm Mark Risis. I'm the head of data strategy and the global data ecosystem for PepsiCo Data Analytics. A little bit about myself. I joined PepsiCo a little over 2 years ago, an interesting time, May 2020. I was brought in by the Chief Data Analytics Officer, Vikram Samaya, who joined only a few months earlier. My background is in media, data, technology, and related. I worked at LiveRamp. I don't know if you guys know that company. It's data pipes for media and advertising. IBM, Watson division. I worked at TiVo Research, and that's how I got into data, learning about viewership data, and in fact, the value of the viewership data became significantly greater than the value of the hardware that was generating the data. Good lesson, I think. On a personal note, I'm a foodie. I'm a passionate golfer. I'm a bad golfer, but I'm a passionate golfer. I love baking. Actually, I have a nice sourdough starter in my fridge right now. I love sushi, any kind of a food, and hang out with my family. I have 2 boys, and we do have a COVID dog. It's a puppy. You can barely see him in there. Named Bear. He's 9 pounds and, vicious like a bear. So as I mentioned, I'm part of the data analytics division. It's actually a brand new division inside of PepsiCo. PepsiCo had, until Vikram joined, never had a chief data officer. The incredible partners we have in IT and the CIO, CTO office had been single-handedly, let's say, carrying forward the torch of data, information, and all that. But it became clear to leadership that in order for PepsiCo to achieve our CEO and board's ambition, which I'll get to in a second, we needed to dedicate resources and focus to the data analytics function. And so Vikram joined. He brought myself and Teresa Riley in. Teresa runs data governance and data stewardship. And shortly thereafter, we were joined by our leader of data management operations, Amla Maitra, a long-tenured professional out of the CIO function, and Gaston Besançon, who is our head of data science, and his background is actually in consulting and those fields. And we really rounded out the leadership team by having a dedicated focus on business operations with the chief of staff, Jennifer Williams. And very importantly, we partnered very closely with our HR and our talent functions, which I'll get to in a second. But that was an incredibly, I think, judicious decision, because the type of talent and the type of skill sets that are required for PepsiCo to become a data-driven digital company were available in PepsiCo, but really kind of scattered throughout, embedded in pockets, and there wasn't a concerted focus and dedication from the talent acquisition, talent management functions to nurture and develop talent, and in turn develop a value proposition to attract talent. We weren't known necessarily by folks that are looking to work in, let's say, Google or Meta or Amazon or the like as a destination. So we wanted to make sure that we do that. Now, why all this? Our vertical, fast-moving consumer goods is under significant macro and micro pressures. I think none of this is surprising to any of you. There is massive acceleration in data creation, why all of us are here and why we continue to get together. Digitalization, digital transformation is encroaching on every facet of our operations, from agriculture to manufacturing, distribution, commercial functions, sales, marketing, advertising, and the like. And of course, the consumer is becoming much more savvy and more digitally native. Competition. Competition is not your traditional. Unfortunately, I think I see a Coke over there. But don't worry, Peter, I won't take it personally yet. The traditional competitors that PepsiCo has had have been joined by an almost infinite number of smaller players, players that have never had to work through the Walmart or bust type of paradigm. They're able to innovate faster. They're able to get to market faster. They're able to use data analytics to identify their niche audience. I think many of us on a personal level have experienced these micro brands that are popping up in your favorite supermarket or convenience store. And so the bar to entry has been lowered, but replaced with a sophistication that our competitors, new competitors, are starting to really accelerate on. Consumer preferences are evolving. Our portfolio is under pressure, and we need to be more dynamic, more agile to respond to these changing, rapidly changing consumer preference tastes. Regulation. I don't need to drain this one, guys. I think we're all here because there's tremendous, in many ways, very positive but challenging wins in the privacy and regulation landscape. And so we need to not only manage for the risk, but also the opportunity to take advantage of some of these. Obviously, Europe, certainly in the United States, and as we're tracking, we're a global company. This is happening in Latin America. This is happening in the Middle East, and Asia Pacific has got its own host of challenges between China and the rest of the APAC sector. And competition of operational efficiency. Like, we have to be better at what we do. PepsiCo has world-class excellence in certain categories. We are one of the best in the world, if not the best in the world, in manufacturing. We're incredible at distribution. We run one of the largest fleets in the United States from a distribution standpoint. But all of that has been built on 100+ years of know-how in the offline world. And in order for us to continue to push the needle on what we do and do it better, we need to invest in data analytics to stay not only competitive, but also responsive. I think the last couple of years have, for our division at least, underscored the importance of building agility and resilience into our system so that we can respond to the certain uncertainty that we now have to face. And that became clear when we had to reset everything in March of 2020 with no baseline to work off of. So data analytics can help. Before I jump into what we try to achieve, I also want to point out that I'm here and Vikram is here because the new CEO, relatively new CEO, Ramon LaGuardia, replaced Indra Nuyuri 3 years ago, let's say. Unlike Indra, who came from consulting and financial engineering background, Ramon is a lifer of PepsiCo. He spent nearly his entire career, 26+ years, moving through the ranks of PepsiCo and being exposed to every geography, every function, and every facet of the business. And so he is blue through and through, and he saw firsthand both the incredible talent and the excellence that PepsiCo represents, but also the challenges of the fragmentation, of siloing, of information quality all over the place, the both functional IT and the shadow IT that gets created when executives need to get things done but simply don't have the means to do it through more formalized channels. And he realized that in order for PepsiCo to be as successful as we have been in the 20th century, in the 21st century, we needed to develop a new set of muscles to complement world-class excellence in manufacturing, world-class excellence in commercial functions, in sales, in distribution, in brand marketing. I think everyone knows the PepsiCo halftime. We need to build a third pillar of excellence centered on digital and data. And in order to drive digital transformation, we had to get our data in order. So in addition to bringing in a new CDAO, Ramon also brought in a chief strategy and transformation officer. Dr. Athena Kanura joined PepsiCo about 6 months after I joined. She was the former chief data officer of Accenture. So she ran about roughly a 30,000 person organization globally. And the data analytics function is now part of strategy and transformation. And that was very deliberate so that we can have the agency and the opportunity to be at the front, not to be an embedded function that's, let's say, really tightly paired with IT, but ultimately a back office function. We needed to be a leading front office function. Now, a lot of our work obviously is in the engineering and things that most folks in the business don't need or necessarily want to see, but we need to be highly visible and highly effective through the business in order to drive enterprise-wide change, not just to create ourselves and become, one of our fears is we become a COE. We become an ivory tower and we do things, but the rest of the business doesn't follow. So it was critical that we are embedded in the business and, in fact, highly interactive and responsive to what our associates need and how we can transform not only ourselves, but the rest of PepsiCo. So the challenge that we were faced with is actually pretty simple. What does PepsiCo need to have, develop, excel in to be a data-driven company? It's a pretty simple question. Like, what do we need to have? People, process, resources, and so on. And to do that, we set out to, one, transform the organizational culture. First and foremost, in fact, that is our first objective, is transform the culture. It's the one we started first. I think we created a literacy team maybe 3 months when the function started because we knew that that is going to be a long haul. And one, we got to invest well ahead of everything else. Well before the clouds get stood up, before the data scientists get their workbench in order, the culture is the hardest nut to crack and the one that is mission critical. If that's not done, everything else can fall to the wayside. Two, we need to make sure that the data that PepsiCo has, and we have massive, massive repositories of data, that the data is governed and accessible and available. What we discovered early on is so much of the data is sitting in laptops, people's brains, or worse. And many times, and while we have incredible employee retention, people really stick around for a very long time, great work satisfaction, et cetera. When someone who has built 20+ years of institutional knowledge leaves, the data leaves with that individual. And cost to replace is exponential, nearly impossible in some cases. So we needed to make sure that we take and elevate data out of people's minds, laptops, private repositories, and make it so that it's discoverable, accessible, and ultimately governed, because we need to set a bar of what does good look like, and in turn, what is not good, so that we can actually be much more efficient. Another key objective for us is driving reuse. The organization, because it's highly federated, executive leadership has huge autonomy, right? Everyone gets their budget. There's allocation across all the geographic units, all the functional units. And historically, with that came, I can do what I want, and I can, frankly, in many ways, achieve something for myself. That's how I get evaluated. That's how I get rewarded. But what happens is we create massive redundancy. Great ideas are aplenty. And unfortunately, sometimes multiple teams basically work on the same thing in parallel. And that fragmentation creates compounding issues because on one, you fracture the investment. So each one gets a fraction conceptually versus what they could be if they pull together. 2, you're going slower because you're under-resourced. And 3, you create fragmentation, duplication, and then you actually fracture trust because it's like, well, which one is the right one? Which one are you supposed to work on? So a huge focus for us, and especially as we're, all of us in our category, in many categories, dealing with a lot of headwinds, with inflation and all that, driving reuse of things that work is a huge principle. And that's actually a cultural principle. Historically, people said, I'm in a new role, I want to set my mark, I'm going to create something new. We're trying to change the values to say, instead of doing something new, you get even more credit if you reuse something that someone somewhere else has already created, because you can make it even better versus starting from scratch. And lastly, if we do the first 3, we do believe we can unlock the true value of PepsiCo data, be able to really articulate the value of data, and ultimately help reposition data analytics as an asset inside of PepsiCo versus historically a cost center. And an asset that in many ways is different than the asset classes that we've been used to, which are depreciating assets. This is a bit forward, but in this crowd, I think you guys can appreciate the data assets follow inverse logic of physical assets. They actually appreciate through use, they don't depreciate. Now, my colleagues in the accounting and control department haven't yet really wrapped their head around that. We'll give them some time, but I do think we have a shot to help the organization understand that these assets are investments that actually appreciate and could be monetized in ways that we certainly know for the near term, but in many ways we can't even imagine what we could do with them for the long term. So this is spectacular, right? You guys are following this, but how does the leadership of the organization wrap their head? What do we need to do? What do we need to build in order to achieve these pretty ambitious objectives? So we did a lot of work, huge collaboration across the data analytics professionals already in PepsiCo, a lot of outsider thinking, partner collaboration, and we've articulated 8 core pillars of 8 capabilities that we at PepsiCo need to develop world-class maturity in to become a data-driven organization. 1, we need to formalize and mature our data strategy. In some cases, we need to have a data strategy, and actually in many cases. So being able to fund systematically, being able to plan systematically, being able to speak the same language. In fact, the rest of this is an output of the data strategy function that I lead, so we can establish that shared understanding on vocabulary, a way to communicate with our colleagues. Again, we are in nearly every country in the world. We operate in 190 markets. We're in every continent. And data appears in every single function inside of PepsiCo. So we need to have that shared language and strategy so we can all, speak to each other consistently and effectively. 2, we needed to mature our data platform architecture. This isn't just about tool selection. This isn't just about, we are an Azure preferred shop. Most of us in the retail, fast-moving goods tend to gravitate to that versus Amazon for all the self-evident reasons. But we need to be flexible. We need to embrace Amazon where relevant, GCP, and so on and so forth. So setting a standard for what our data architecture should be is critical. And we need to mature that as a capability. Again, each of these is process, each of these is resources, each of these are skills, people, and so on and so forth. 3, we need to formalize how we source data. If we're going to be a data-driven organization, we need to have a sophisticated means to systematically acquire data, both internally, because of the federated nature of the company. Imagine tens of thousands of data repositories scattered throughout the world. Being able to source internal data is critical. Same for external data. Being able to formalize and standardize how data comes into PepsiCo, and in fact mature that so that we can evolve certain relationships that are more transactional to be also centered on data sharing and data sourcing, is a functionality we wanted to mature. Data management, I don't need to drain on that. I think we're all here pretty familiar. How critical it is to build world-class excellence in all the functions of data management, data operations, and so forth. Data governance. In order to ensure data quality, in order to build trust in the data, in order to have confidence in the analytical outputs, the data has to be governed. And in turn, it's actually a cultural transformation. Data owners need to be identified, and in some cases, informed that they are, in fact, data owners. If you work on something, it's not someone else's job to make sure that the quality of what you're producing is maintained. The analytics and AI. As I mentioned, analytics is actually fairly matured inside of PepsiCo, but it's highly federated, and it's embedded inside of geographic and functional units. We needed to really kind of create a gravity and mature the ability for us to be super advanced and kinetic with our analytics and AI capabilities. And part of that is actually creating a gravity for data scientists, creating a forum, a community to bring everyone that touches analytics and the more advanced users moving into kind of the AI space. We need to create that capability and deliberately invest in that capability. Back to the super tight alignment with our HR partners, we needed to be able to attract data scientists to PepsiCo and to present them with a means to progress, to be part of a community, and to see themselves as having a career in this set of skills in advanced analytics and AI in PepsiCo. Next-gen BI. I'll touch more on that, but in summary, next-gen BI for us is moving away from where historically we've been, which is hyper-focus on descriptive tasks, what happened, and in some cases why it happened, and starting to move into auto-generated insights to refocus the organization on what will happen, what can happen, and start moving into those types of interactions with the data versus disproportionate amount of time looking back, right, looking forward. And data culture. In order for this to take root, we needed to be explicit that data culture is as critical of a capability to mature in as the other 7 functions, the other 7 capabilities. And we've been fortunate in that the importance of data culture has been recognized by leadership on down, and I'll share more in a second, but we now have a digital and data academy. We have the means to really mature the culture and seed and embed it inside of PepsiCo. So let's talk a little bit about how we bring these capabilities to life. We, as I mentioned, need a means to source data. Granular data comes from a variety of sources. One of the, I think, incredible achievements of late is we've matured our data domain architecture. We've now synthesized that there are 5 primary master domains that all of our data fits into: customer, material, vendor, consumer, and finance. There's a set of, lack of a better word, secondary domains. They're incredibly critical, but not as systemic like HR and facilities and things like that. But these 5 we've identified can basically drive the majority of the decision-making applications that PepsiCo needs to drive its business. So we need to bring this data in and systematically, at hyper-granular level, be able to land it somewhere. We need a platform that has both scale, speed, and resilience to take on this complexity and to manage what's to come. The unimaginable future, we need to be able to respond to things that are around the corner. So we've landed on a foundation that's based on medallions, starting with the landing zone where all data gets brought in. it moves to a bronze layer where it's cleansed, organized, and formatted. Still not really usable. Only advanced engineering, MLOps folks can really get into the bronze layer, so it's highly restricted. Once it moves to the silver layer, it is standardized, it is cleaned, it is governed, and it is now, it's still in a general format, so it's in a common data model state, but it is now available to advanced analytics users. They can actually start playing. Data scientists can get their hands on it at that point. It's fit for moving to the gold layer. Now, gold layer is where the common models become specific models, and that is actually where the API integration with our application, common application framework happens. So that each of the outputs from the gold layer now expands the user base significantly, right? So landing zone, very small number of users. In fact, thankfully, not too many people need to touch that. As it moves up, the user base expands to the point where it gets to the gold layer. It starts to fit into applications where it can be delivered either in a reporting format or ideally in a decisioning or an actioning format to n number of users. At that point, you have basically, there's no qualification necessary to consume the output of the platform once it goes above the gold layer. It's, as consumers, it's your iTunes, it's your Google Maps, it's the same thing that you interact with as consumers. We're now making that intelligence accessible to all the associates relevant across PepsiCo, our partners, and so on and so forth. That drives reuse, right? So once things land in the silver layer, we want to reuse that over and over and over. In fact, we don't want to create another one for that data set, that data source, that data model. We want to drive as many use cases as possible. So you want to massively expand what is being fed by the gold layer, and that actually creates ROI. So for one investment, you drive n number of applications, and therefore you monetize the asset much more efficiently. We can't expect everyone to go into the silver layer and grab massive data sets to play with R or Python or things like that. What we've also realized is, back to the original objective, making data accessible to the organization, we needed a simple entry point, simple pane of glass for anyone in PepsiCo to be able to search, discover, and depending on permissions, be able to access and consume data. That did not exist to date, back to laptops, Excel sheets. Jane has this data set, so you got to go call her to get it, type of thing. We deliberately invested, almost at the same time as we invested in data culture, in building a data marketplace. And the data marketplace is exactly that. It's a store front. We know stores. We're very good at that. Where people, using Google search, can go and query for whatever data they need. They can use business terms. They don't need to use data repository terms. They don't need to call a particular server. They use the same language that they use in their day-to-day business operations. They ask a question. They get a set of prioritized results. In fact, we've evolved where now, based on your role, you get prioritization based on your domain, so that people in, let's say, Benelux get results that are at Benelux, not for Brazil. We are able to rank, vote. There's metadata associated with it. There's common uses of the data set. There is consumption access, so you can actually request access of the data. There is a pass-through mechanism, so if data is used in a set of, let's say, dashboards or report, you can jump right to it. So we are centralizing the means by which organization consumes its data, and we're creating a behavior where people go and query. And so we expect a lot of the assets in the gold and, to select few, in the silver layer to be consumed through that single entry point. And we're very excited about that development. So moving on to sourcing. Historically, because of the federated nature of the organization, data sourcing happened everywhere. It happened everywhere geographically. It happened in many functions. In some cases, it was centralized. Our global insights team did a tremendous job kind of corralling a lot of the panels and external data sourcing. But we never really matured that as a function. So We created a group called Global Data Partnerships and Acquisitions to work closely with our data governance team, who does the same thing but for internal data, to be able to systematically get requests for use cases that need to be solved from data science, from analytics professionals, from business, be able to scout, evaluate, vet, run bake-offs, and land on preferred partners that are fit to task being sought. And I actually heard this at the keynote, that the two gentlemen from Department of State and DoD, I think they went through a similar exercise. I mean, I guess everyone's doing it. We had a bit of an issue with our valued but fairly aggressive data vendors being able to resell the same data to different constituents across PepsiCo many times over. Why? Because there was no means to triangulate where things are coming in. So part of the benefit is, it looks like a funnel, but it's also a front door. We now have a single means for data to come into PepsiCo, and that also achieves the reuse objective. If it comes in once, we can then showcase where else can it be used, and when someone needs data, they don't go to an outside party, they go to this function, and they can systematically acquire and provision, or ideally say, hey, we actually already have something that pretty much fits the bill, so let's just use that. And again, drive that reuse, and for the same investment, get higher ROI. And that function caters to top global programs, the key transformational initiatives that we're driving the digital transformation against. It caters to our geographic operating units, the sectors and the markets within them. And they are also highly responsive. So when something new happens, they can take a request and have a commercial sensibility to say, we will service you, and have SLAs and all that stuff. So formalizing this function was a huge unlock for us, and we're seeing the benefits of that as we continue to reduce the number of vendors we work with, but at the same time reinvest the savings in net new data that our data scientists, our advanced analytics professionals are asking for, right? So it creates a virtuous cycle. Data governance. I gotta admit, when I started, for me, data governance was a bit like, I thought of it as more of like a policing force, if you will. But I have learned through incredible collaboration with Teresa and her team that governance is a hugely critical and a business-driving function. Because without data governance, we don't have trust in the data. And what happens is when the data is not governed, when people don't trust in the data, fragmentation of the truth. I run a report, it says this, someone else runs same data set, another report, it says that, and then 90% of the time is spent arguing whose answer is correct based on assumptive moments in the process, or in some cases, ambitions and individual objectives. And so governance is hugely critical to instill trust in the data so people don't spend as much time figuring out where it's coming from and if it's right or not, but focusing on what do I do with it to make better decisions and take actions that are much more effective. So it's a huge unlock from a time spent and an investment standpoint, and that's achieved by establishing data policies, setting up the right conversations so that those constituents, data owners, consumers of the data, and so on, have forums to interact. Everyone trusts that what is being discussed is being implemented through procedures, standards, and effectively managed through the right set of tools. So we're proactively investing in best-in-class tools to govern, steward, ensure data quality, monitor the data. Everything in the foundation you guys see, there is a parallel stream of capabilities that are monitoring data from landing through bronze. Obviously, that's where the quality issues get resolved. But certainly at the silver and the gold layer, that is where we need to be absolutely Teflon with data quality. And the notion of everyone who touches data is a data owner is something that this team is championing. They're pushing it through all the operating units. Admittedly, it hasn't been the smoothest exercise. I think the culture historically has taken their, let's call it dirty laundry, and given it to IT for remediation. And unfairly, our colleagues in IT had to constantly clean and harmonize and maintain the quality standards. But I think we're really getting there, and part of it is, again, identifying owners, upskilling, and empowering them with the things they need to do to ensure that the data is governed and quality is maintained. Obviously, huge implications for risk and privacy and things like that. The privacy program. So privacy by design is something we've absolutely embraced. It's connected to the way our operational structures are being deployed. There is a baseline framework that we're rolling out. And ultimately, again, privacy by design, empowered by tools. And as we mature more in the consumer domain, that's becoming even more critical on top of everything we need to manage from an InfoSec standpoint in the B2B space. Benefits, culture that's highly conscious of privacy. It's not somebody else's job, it's everybody's job. Everyone has an accountability in it. Everyone understands. Again, it's not a boogeyman, it's not scary, it's actually a very powerful and critical function for everyone to embrace. And builds that agility into the system so that we can adapt, respond. We accept that there will be changes that we need to take advantage of, lest we be taken advantage by them. So that's really critical for us. On the analytics and AI, as I mentioned, we've historically spent a huge amount of investment in the descriptive state, and that didn't really leave a lot of time for focusing on optimization, the predictive and the prescriptive capabilities. So our North Star is to use the platform to basically remove the task of descriptive from the organization that's done systematically and really refocus the talent and the time on predictive and prescriptive, driving next best actions, building trust that if the algorithm recommends, the associate should trust the algorithm 70, 80% of the time, right? This is not a replacement for the incredible talent we have. It is an acceleration of the value we can get from them and allowing them to focus on higher value tasks. And the way we are driving this is 4 dimensions. One is building a catalog of data science accelerators, a library similar to the marketplace. There is a subset of the marketplace for advanced analytics, catalog of algorithms that have been battle tested. And again, you grab one and reuse instead of building a new one from scratch. Massive focus on responsible AI and bias mitigation. I think we can spend an entire session on that, but I'll just leave it that we're highly conscious and deliberately investing in bias mitigation and being super conscious of the implication that the algorithms that we're developing have for both PepsiCo, our associates, and the ecosystem at large. Creating data science workbench, ability for our data scientists that are coming in to be provisioned with a space where they can experiment, where they can innovate, and ultimately come up with the answers that are tasked with generating. At the same time, we have a framework that takes those innovations and puts them into MLOps so we can engineer and automate and really wire it into the system. And again, recoup the time that data scientists would have spent otherwise in providing output as service to creating systems that provide output based on the innovations the data science community created. And that ultimately leads us to a system of systems that enables PepsiCo to operate at advanced data maturity. On Next-Gen BI, we have identified 2 pain points. One, because of the hidden nature of a lot of the data and some of the limitations that we've had from a capability standpoint, a lot of insights were left undiscovered. Time was spent on what happened, not what could have happened or why things happen. And then the federated nature means a lot of the exploration was manual and the scenarios were tested in parallel and there wasn't really a connective tissue. which leads to siloed decision-making. And that conversation that we've all been part of, your output says this, my output says that. Let's spend the next 3 weeks figuring out why and argue amongst ourselves. That is not time we want to keep investing in. In fact, we want to recoup that time so that we can systematically surface key insights through next-gen BI, automatically generate what we think the associates need to be paying attention to, automate, empower our associates to actually do their own scenario testing, not submit a ticket, but run the if-then scenarios on the fly, right there and then in the system, so that simulation of output can be generated in the moment, and ultimately democratize that. So when someone lands on an output, publish that in the marketplace. Show everyone else what you've accomplished and accelerate the next individual's task, because they can reuse what you've done and they can build on it and then reshare, reshare, reshare. And with the right data quality and trust, the decisions are embraced and collectively owned, and everyone rallies, and the incredible bias to action that PepsiCo has can be truly realized. This framework now is, again, moving to embedding this instead of it being in pockets. It's systematic. We're pushing for augmented decision-making, insights that are actionable, insights that users embrace and then backpropagate, and ultimately, again, democratized. So lastly, culture is something we believe has to be embraced by all. We've all been through training sessions for InfoSec. We've all been to training sessions where you get the email that says you have not completed your training session and you must. It is necessary. I'm a big believer in that, but that's not how you create culture, right? Culture is about behavior that's owned and is autonomous and is initiated by individuals out of their own volition because they believe it's good for them and it's good for the organization, not because someone tells you to do that. What we've done is to drive our culture around 4 key dimensions: building trust, building confidence, taking ownership, and making sustainable choices. Again, it's a topic I can probably spend another hour on, about sustainability's role in data in addition to our focus on sustainability in our agriculture, our packaging, and our distribution choices. What we've done is taken incredible work done by colleagues around PepsiCo values, the PepsiCo way, and we've aligned our culture movement with the core values of PepsiCo. It's about integrity, it's about taking ownership, and it's about celebrating success. As Ramon himself so eloquently says, our digital transformation is about a culture evolution from Superman or Wonder Woman, superhero of one, to moving to an Avengers or an X-Men group of superheroes that together can accomplish more than any one superhero can on their own. And to do that, Ramon himself and the leaders are demonstrating that first and foremost, not just saying, hey, you guys do this, they're doing it themselves. So what we've done is actually started with our leadership from a data literacy and data culture standpoint, and custom created a curriculum to take the top 250 executives across global PepsiCo leadership through an entire multi-hour data immersion session. It was custom created. We sourced a few of them were fairly advanced, so they helped us shape it, but it was bespoke, and the fact that we got 3 hours of these individuals' time, these are sector CEOs, the chief financial officer, was absolutely incredible. And we're now cascading this to next levels. Vikram, for example, led a data literacy session using this content, the enterprise data strategy, to take every VP plus through a few weeks ago. And we're continuing to cascade. In parallel, we're developing opportunities for upskilling for the associates. We're creating opportunities for communities to start coming together. I mentioned we have a data science and advanced analytics community. We're creating community and forum for data strategists. We're creating community and forum for folks of more engineering set of skills, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, we are not constrained. Our ambition is to take the entire organization through some flavor of this, obviously more advanced for some, more technical for some, more business focused for others, and create a movement where everyone has a shared understanding. Their adoption is seamless, almost invisible, right? You're not forcing, people embrace and adopt. And ultimately, we want everyone in PepsiCo to be an advocate of data analytics as a critical capability for PepsiCo to drive our business and be as successful as we've been in the 21st century. So how do we know that we're doing well? Like, I mean, these are great ideas, but how do you know if we're actually succeeding? What we've now done is put ourselves on a multi-year roadmap to assess how well across these 8 capabilities we are doing at a operating unit, geographic unit, functional unit, and identify opportunities where we need to improve, build a roadmap for what we need to do to improve, and reassess. So every year, and we're actually through about 10 markets right now, and we're probably going to land in the top 15 markets, every sector, measuring our maturity and having a roadmap for what we need to do to improve into 23 and 24 very systematically. And we've adopted the DCAM model and customized it for ourselves. I don't know if you guys are familiar with DCAM, Enterprise Data Management Council. And right now, my team is running these assessments with, as I mentioned, all these markets. Where are we? Have we not initiated? Is it conceptual, somewhere on a whiteboard or somebody's sketchpad? Developmental, there's a leader, there is funding, there is a roadmap. And then ultimately, in some cases, have we defined, it's now matured, it's established, it's embedded, it's fully operational, and a bit of ambitious, but I think achievable state, have we achieved full maturity? World-class excellence in that capability. The model, just so you guys can appreciate, is actually based on 2 assessments. One is sentiment. Tell us how you think you're doing. And then give us evidence. Prove that what you stated is actually, in fact, true. Now, it's more gentle than that, but in general, like, we believe you, but we kind of need to see the evidence. So it actually creates a little bit of tension on the front end, but once people realize where it's going, people really, really appreciate the diligence and the thoroughness with which we're driving this. And so our plan is continue to assess, build playbooks that people can use to drive their maturity up, co-create roadmaps. What do they need to do? Where can global data analytics play a role? Where does the function play a role? Where does the sector IT CIO play a role? Where does our global business services function play a role? It's highly interactive and highly collaborative, but unyielding in its focus on driving that maturity. And I'll tell you next year how we did. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. Great talk. I wish we could bottle this. I mean, one of the reasons we're doing all of this is to try and help everybody else to get up with these things. And you told some really great stories in there. I'm going to take my red hat privilege as the first question on this that relates to the highest one. So if you guys aren't paying attention, the Wahuva platform, they let you vote questions up and down. It's really, really nice. So we've got the #1 question. I'll lead you into it. You mentioned that you were buying from external sources and finding that they were very clever in selling the same data to different parts of the company. Can you give us any idea of how much value, as in dollars, you were able to save? A range? Is it tens of dollars, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars?
Yeah. So kind of two parts to that. One, we have a pretty 8-figure ambition in terms of productivity that we're going to take out of the system this year, probably more. But the way we're doing it is not just traditional sort of cost-cutting procurement type of a thesis. And we work super closely with our partners in procurement now. We actually have a new function created called metrics modeling monetization, where each of the partners, we systematically do evaluation. So this is the cost of the data, and this is the value that data generates based on the applications that it's feeding into or use cases that it's solving. And so we're triangulating that cost to value and basically trying to lop off things where it makes sense. And we do that for third-party data, and we started to empower our commercial leads on our retailer data. So all of our retailers, we have some degree of data collaboration, data sharing with a commercial implication. And so we're trying to be very diligent and systematic of how we value that data as well. And that's the approach.
I think you covered some of this too, but maybe just elaborate. How do you keep track of data ROI for each data project while enabling the data strategy?
Yeah, we have a team specifically dedicated. In fact, that's a thesis for all of this. If you make it part of somebody else's job, like responsibility 4 or 5, it doesn't really get the focus and prioritization. So you create a dedicated group that does just that and achieves excellence in just that, including something that heretofore wasn't really done, which is assigning value to the data.
Thank you. Great talk. I'm with an independent federal agency. Looking across the stream that you displayed that PepsiCo has been on, I see ourselves having pretty good traction in that first half, data management, enterprise data catalog, metadata, data governance. But we're not yet into, or I think there's an opportunity and a risk for what I would call analytics governance. You said a number of things here, but what are some of the key approaches, techniques you use to, once you do have an authoritative source of data and you have trust in your data, making sure and testing that people are using it to make appropriate decisions? And
yeah.
Is governance tightly coupled or a part of data governance, analytics governance?
It's actually a really great question, and we are in active, healthy debate internally whether it is a responsibility of the governance team or actually the analytics governance is part of the data science and advanced analytics team. And I think the data science analytics side is winning because of the intimacy and the accountability they have, especially around bias mitigation. And I think they claim they know what good looks like better. So I'll trust them on that one.
Super. Next question from the internet is, how do you convince the C-suite that data is important to the transformation? I know you covered that partly, but were there some specific things that give the people aha moments? Because most of the time, as you know, when you talk to the C-suite, they're like,
Yeah. Well, I'm incredibly fortunate. We are incredibly fortunate in that our CEO had this as a concept to begin with. So Ramon was unequivocal that data is critical. In fact, the digital transformation starts with data. So thankfully, we benefit from top-down endorsement. And because when COVID hit, he was actually shockingly found himself with all the free time that he never had because he didn't have to travel. So he spent hours and hours with Vikram on developing his own acumen and language, and just incredible watching him adopt and absorb and make his own some of these more advanced concepts. This immersion session that we held actually did a lot for that, because the way to explain this complexity is we had to use metaphors. And one of the ways we helped our leaders understand that data is critical is by basically comparing data to something everyone in PepsiCo knows: potatoes. Everyone appreciates the value of a potato not because of its potato-ness, but because you can make many things with it. And you have to source it, you have to ensure its quality, you have to invest in it. We have a facility in Minnesota where we are tracking like 220 species of potato. So it's like data's just like that. You can't just do it ad hoc, otherwise it won't really scale. And once you create a metaphor that they can apply what they know intimately to something new, it becomes a lot easier to explain the value.
So I have a question. In terms of executing against the data strategy that you put up there, how often do you use partners, and really what do you use them for?
We lean on great partners all the time. Now, having said that, we are in-housing some of the core functions, but we always work with great partners, whether it's data providers, consulting partners, resource augmentation partners, and in some cases, we don't necessarily want to build everything, so healthy debate on build versus buy, and we certainly look to best-in-class platform providers to help accelerate things that just make it easier for us to get something and get ahead versus building. So fairly open to that, but there are critical things that we believe from a competitive and just IP standpoint we need to own, and those are ours.
Next most upvoted question on the Wahoo is, what role does data literacy play, which you've spoken to, but how are you going about increasing data literacy?
Yeah, I think I covered off on that. I mean, it's same thing. It's dedicated investment, dedicated focus, dedicated accountability, and a series of programs that are happening in parallel across leadership and across associates. Huge focus on community. PepsiCo is it's a people culture. It's a very relationship-driven culture, and so we're tapping into that natural preference of the organization to come together and creating opportunities for people to come together and have that, again, literacy be in action, not dictated or dubbed down by, some literacy team that says, speak like this.
You mentioned the complex value chain that you have. I'm curious if you're seeing any places within the value chain, whether it's R&D, manufacturing, supply chain, customer experience, where you're seeing the most gravity or the greatest value potential from the data architecture and strategy that you put in place? And also, are there any particular challenges in any of those spots in the value chain? Also, considering any corporate initiatives, like I know Pepsi's ESG initiative, just kind of curious where you're seeing the greatest value opportunity.
Yeah, I guess I don't have the luxury or the benefit to prioritize. We are a seed to smile function, so we are expected to drive value across the entire value chain. So inclusive, not this or that. So we are actually seeing it pretty much across everything, and tremendous maturity happening inside of R&D space and agro investment. Huge improvements in the supply chain in terms of kind of RPA and embedding our entire manufacturing facilities with robotics. Now, those will move at a slower pace relative to some of the commercial functions that have done leapfrogs in terms of real granular understanding of our stores, real appreciation for consumer data, something new for PepsiCo. Relative to the other domains that I mentioned. So I expect some of the commercial functions to move faster just because they're not as encumbered with the infrastructure. Maybe the supply chain a little slower, but much more, I think, impactful ultimately as we get massive efficiency. I'll give you one example. We have a plant in Mexico, in Vallejo, that has gone to full kind of digital twin AI thesis, and they've doubled capacity, doubled output without increasing a single square foot of space. And those of you in supply chain, that's like science fiction. Like, it's not supposed to happen, right? It's a limitation of space equals limitation of output. So because they've done a tremendous digitalization of the entire thing, it's now fully autonomous. So from the moment the commodity enters the plant, a person doesn't touch the product at all. In fact, there's like rails that load them into trucks. So huge improvement in supply chain. It's just a question of how we can scale that across all of our key facilities. But ultimately, every single aspect of the value chain is maturing, advancing, and we think by year 5 we should have critical mass pretty much everywhere.
We'll let the birthday person have his last question here.
Well, we've all heard the term data ownership a lot, and in talking to people, I hear 2 different themes. One is that no one wants to take responsibility for the data. The other is that many people want to claim the data. So I'm curious, which did you experience, and how did you deal with it?
Oh, we have both. Yeah, yeah. No, it's not my responsibility, but you can't use it. It's mine. Yeah. I think again I go back to the values of PepsiCo. The PepsiCo way is helping us tremendously because we are again tethering to integrity. The culture is an ownership-centric culture. It's just about getting people to understand that you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to, put your part into the baking of it, type of thing. So it's a bit of both, but I think again, considering how relatively little time we've been at it, I think we've been making tremendous progress and getting everyone to really appreciate the value of data ownership as creator and consumer at the same time.
We did not get to all the questions on the Mahova, of course, and there's probably some more as well, but we're out of time. Mark, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Will you be around for others if they have questions to come up?
Oh, I'll be around.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.